woman as political problems. And then that got expanded in this third wave of feminism, which talks a bit more about cultural issues and also matters of individuality and diversity as relating to gender, right? So that's where we went to. We had a little bit of discussion afterwards. And today we are going to talk about feminism in a more broader, in a more societal sense, talking about how feminism fits in with the rest of politics, etc. And I want to start that, dear students, by talking to the men amongst us, because the first point I want to make is that feminism is not just about women, or at least it is not just relevant for women. So fellas, I'm talking to you now, right? In case you are wholly unsympathetic towards women, for example, because you have not forgiven them for biting the apple in the Garden of Eden, right? Or something like that. I think there's still good reasons to open your eyes and be a bit attentive to feminism. I'm going to give you 3 of them out of many, many. So that's what I want to start with. Now, the first reason has to do with equal pay for equal work, right? We have this phenomena where in various situations and countries, women earn less for the same work. And you might initially think that this is cool, right? That you earn more than women, because it puts you in economical superiority and things like that. However, I come from the future and I want to warn you that once you grow up, this stops being funny. Why? Because you have to think about it to see the big trick that's happening here. You have to see it from the perspective of the employer, right? Half the population are women, a bit less than half the workforce are women. That means that as you're an employer, if you're the capitalist class, if you can find an excuse to pay a bit under half your workforce less, then you're saving enormous amounts of money, right? So if they can somehow convince you that it's cool that women earn less, that means that they have to pay you less, and you might, women less, and you might think, oh, that's cool, but unless you're gay, you probably grow up and want to live with a woman at some point. And when that happens, you will learn that you as a family will earn less because of this, right? So the capitalist class basically uses sexism as a trick to just pay families less money than they normally would. Yes, and if you accept this, then you're kind of accepting that your family as a whole is going to make less money. So it's not so much employers versus women as it is in practice employers versus families, because they just found an excuse to pay people less, and that's money that you won't be able to spend on getting a better car. So discrimination of women on the labor market is very problematic also for you. This ties in to the second point, which has to do with something that you might have never thought about, which is maternity or paternity leave, right? Equal rights often is not necessarily in the advantage of men, but sometimes it is. And one of those cases is in maternity leave. In Mexico, women only get about 4 months. Maternity leave means when you have a baby that you can stay home, right? Get about 4 months, sometimes it's extended. Men get 2 weeks. My son was born at the start of Christmas holiday, so I got nothing at all for this. So that's a big inequality. And if we would not have that, if men would get paid time off as well, equally long as women, that would have a lot of advantages. Now, Astrid is saying, yeah, but that does nothing for women, right? Well, why would this be feminism? Well, Miss Astrid, give me a second to explain that. It is in the advantage of both men and women if men get more time. Why? Because that would eliminate the first point. One of the excuses employers use to pay women less is that they can get pregnant and therefore they'll be missing, right? Now, if you extend that risk to men, that both men and women would be missing in the case of children, you have no reason to discriminate either. You have no basis to do that on, and thus you have no more basis to discriminate against women. So this is an advantage of both. It's an advantage of women because they don't stand out anymore, and it's in the advantage of us because we get more time, that we don't have to work, right? Yeah, okay, we have to spend time with the kids, etc. But you also have more time to watch sports. Miss Samantha.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on the comment that usually a big problem that we have in Mexico is that men don't rehearse their paternity the to the fullest that they could, because like as you mentioned, this could be one of the points that they are not given a chance to actually bond with their children or spend time or be active and present at home.
Mm-hmm. But it's not much time anyway. But yeah, this you also have a cultural factors that run against this, right? It's not just legal factors. Uh-huh. That is true. So these are 2 points. And now the third and most controversial point, for which you hate me, but it doesn't make it any less true, is the point that men have to also understand that women sometimes support machismo directly or indirectly, in the sense that some of them, they're more common here in San Pedro than in other parts of the state. Some of them are very comfortable with the idea that men should economically dominate, thus maintain them, and will promote the idea that real men will pay for everything, right? You will know this from trying to date people, for example, that there'll be the expectation, depending on who you try to date, that you will pay for everything, sometimes first date, sometimes second date, sometimes forever, right? And the older you get, the more annoying this is. To give you a real life example of this, I once, because I'm not Catholic, to get married, we had to go to all kind of counseling nonsense with the church. And one of them involved a conversation with some nice San Pedro lady who was starting to talk to me about finances in my marriage. And she said, well, you will have to buy your wife a new car every 3 years. To which I said, woman, I don't even have a car myself. What are you talking about? Right? But she started talking that if her husband couldn't buy her a car every 3 years, he wouldn't really be her husband, right? He would, I don't know what he would be. He would definitely not be a man. And these type of ideas are things you want to shield yourself from, because you think it might be funny at first, until you get in a situation where you cannot pay, right? What will happen, Mr. Macho, if you graduate, you run into an absolutely beautiful woman who's also your girlfriend by then, and when you graduate, she, for example, because her family dies, lands a better job than you. So now she's gonna earn more than you. Are you gonna break up with her? Or are you, is things going to be awkward forever, right? These are not things you want to set yourself up for, right? This type of problems. And that society as a whole kind of does this to you. For example, in my case, my wife earns more than me, about double. We have the same job, exactly. We have the same degree, same job, except she works in private. I work in public. I used to work in private, but I love you more than the Fifis, dear students. So that's why I made my base here. But that has consequences, right? I run out of money faster. So if we're out to eat at some point later in the month, and the waiter comes with the bill and he stares me in the eyes, and I have to pass it to my wife, then it seems like the whole restaurant gasps for air, and all kind of awkwardness zooms. That's what machismo culture does to you, and you don't really want that. So there are good reasons as men, even if you have no sympathy for women at all, which you should have, why to pay attention to feminism. Matter of fact, I want to expand a bit on how gender is messing with us in society. And I will do that, dear students, with the almost absurd example of cars. It's almost absurd. Let me talk to you about the gendering of cars. this is one of the first things I've noticed when coming to this continent, is that cars apparently are gendered here. In Europe, cars are also gendered, but also only in the function of size, in the sense that manly cars will typically just be bigger than female cars, in the sense that, you know, you would have the manly car would be the normal BMW, and then the female car would be the Mini Cooper type of thing. But that's only in function of size and money, in a sense. Here, cars are gendered in their function. Here we have masculinity and femininity enhancing cars. Masculinity enhancing cars being pickups, which would somehow signify, communicate work, right? Outdoor activity, and femininity enhancing cars, which will signal reproduction. These are the infamous mommy vans, you know, these big cars that back out backwards onto the highway. Those. Now, I want to encourage you to see the absurdity of this. And in case you drive any of these cars, I'm sorry, it's not personal. So, at us with Hegel in mind, right, with Hegel's critique of consumerism and false needs, look at this. Why is this absurd? First of all, because it's pure performance. These cars are not what they pretend to be, right? In the case of the mommy van, after lots of observation, I've noticed that most people that drive a mommy van don't actually have a lot of kids, or sometimes no kids at all, right? Typically, they'll have 2 kids, like the average family is in Mexico, or 2.5, 3, and therefore they would fit in any normal car. Matter of fact, in Europe, you don't have mommy vans. You could have them if you would order them somehow, but a normal car dealership does not have them in their display room, because we know kids also fit a normal car. But over here, you have this need to signal motherhood, and that's why we have them, right? Even if you have only 1 kid, the mommy van will still make you look more like a mom. The same thing goes with pickup trucks. Pickup trucks of the expensive type, of the showing off type, like the Dodge Ram in the picture, are not actually used for work. Matter of fact, they don't even work for that purpose. If you would pay attention to pickup trucks that actually transport stuff, they are usually smaller trucks. They're not these big monster vehicles. They're actually quite small cars. And it has a reason, because as the word says, you have to pick things up and put it in the trunk. The higher the trunk, the less practical it is, right? If you're a farmer, you have to lift up a sheep. With this ram, you have to lift it over your head to kind of get it in. Yeah, you're not going to do that. And I'm not basing this just on intuition. I once took the effort to count pickup trucks. I was waiting for the bus, I think, until I saw one that had actually something in it, right? I got to 86 of these trucks before I saw one that I think had a plant in the back. So almost everyone who drives this doesn't actually work with their hands for a living. If they would have a more practical car. So both are in a sense just performance of gender. They don't even do what they're supposed to do. And on top of that, they're extremely expensive, right? In order to be gender typical, you have to pay a big price. The most common mommy van is the Honda Odyssey, which is also the most expensive car in Honda's range. I own the sport one, the coupe. This costs more than double of what my car costs, right? So that's a bit weird. The same with the Ram is also, well, the pickup truck's also one of the most expensive. Mostly the pickup trucks and mommy vans are the 2 most expensive types of car in any range, outside supercars. So you pay a lot, and on top of that, both of these cars, of these gendered cars, have a very high ecological footprint, right? They pollute and they exhaust a lot of carbon dioxide when they drive, because they're so big and heavy. So, dear students, my almost absurd example should explain to you that the gender in cars and the over-gendering of things can sometimes be dysfunctional. Do you understand me? I had a lot of lag earlier. I don't know if I'm clear. Miss Samantha.
Hi, I'm sorry. I'll try not to get cut off this time. Um, we were just mentioning in the chat on WhatsApp that here sometimes we see on the pickup trucks that some guys put this, I guess, metal bull testicles on the back of the pickups. Like they're literally having like a pair of fake testicles and they're driving around. And I guess that comment like goes hand in hand with the whole concept you were explaining about how we even put gender on cars and things that should not have anything to do with it, but we are just like really into that.
I've never noticed that.
It's a thing, I assure you.
I also noticed that lesbians like to drive pickup trucks to, or not kind of transgendery people, to also, you can play with it. It's interesting. So yeah, but we gendered cars. I've never heard the ball story. I must look closer. So now I want to switch, I want to pivot a bit and talk about the relation of feminism to contemporary politics. This is going to be a bit difficult part because I'm going to talk about ideologies I have not explained yet. I'm going to talk about socialism, communism, neoliberalism, fascism, etc. That's a bit painful because I switched the order of my lectures. But if you don't get something, just put a pin in it and it will all become clear later, right? So I'm just going to go through this with that apology already given, that sometimes I might use words that are not very clear to you. So how does feminism relate to the different ideologies in a general sense, right? I've already explained last time that there is quite a strong link between communism and feminism historically. Communism granting equal rights, the first of the different systems. And also socialism has often been on the front line of many feminist struggles like voting rights, but also like reproductive rights, etc., maternity, etc. So why is that? Why are they somehow related? Although in theory they're not about the same thing, right? One's about the working class, the other is about women. Well, socialists have this, in general, socialists have a certain ideological sensitivity towards injustice and towards protecting the underdog, right? They're typically more morally compelled to try to help the weak, or the ones that seem to have been wronged, right? This is not the ideology of the strong. And thus that makes women, but also immigrants, ethnic minorities, etc., often natural allies of the socialist movement. Even if they're about different things, socialism will typically have sympathy, let's say, for people in this position. And they're also allies of convenience because often they're striving for the same thing, right? If you're striving for equal wage, you're basically striving for higher wages, which is something socialists want anyway. If you are striving for equal education, access to higher education, then you're striving for something that socialists want anyway, right? If you're talking about a type of positive rights, that means that the government is supposed to do something for you, right? Like provide access to maternal care, provide access to birth control. So these are struggles to get something from the state, right? Which are typically struggles that socialists are also involved in because they want the state to organize things and to provide for the people. So they often overlap in what they want, even if they're different things in theory. The only times where that does not happen or where there is a certain delay in the adaptation of certain feminist things would be with some third wave feminist demands, because they would conflict with the working class nature of some socialist or communist movements. So, for example, if you would have a law that would say that you could go to prison for whistling at a beautiful woman on the street, construction workers and other working class individuals might not be too happy about such laws, and therefore maybe socialist parties could be a bit slow in making that transition, because they have to balance their core constituency versus these things, right? But in most cases, they are natural allies. A question for you, dear audience. Who are the people at the bottom? Who are the people at the bottom? Ah, somebody new. Diego says it's the cabinet of AMLO. You are the first person, Diego, ever in 2 years to get this question. Normally people don't know who the government is, but you got it right. This is the original. They changed, now half of them have left. But this is the original cabinet. And as you can see, half of them are women in there for the first time in history. So that is feminism and the left. Now let us talk about the right part. So of these, a lot of these women are not super well known. Probably the Secretary of Work, which is the lady with the white background at the bottom next to Ebrar. She's probably the most well-known one of them. But yes, now let's jump the political spectrum to the right. Talk about this relation. This is a bit more complex. If we talk about the center right, liberalism and neoliberalism. Liberalism historically has been sometimes positive towards the feminist cause. You had authors like, for example, that we discussed, John Locke, who stands in this tradition, who are, let's say, neutral towards women, which for their time is a big thing already, right? To not be against equality is already important. But sometimes, not always, because liberalism is an elite ideology and the elite is not always very progressive, but sometimes they will actually push the ball forward. For example, and we're going to discuss liberalism next week. For example, in this tradition, you have John Stuart Mill, who wrote a lot about liberty, very important key thinker of the liberal movement. And he also wrote an essay about woman called The Subjection of Woman, which is not a manual on how to do it, but a critique of the subjection of woman and the lack of freedom that women experience in traditional society. So you have some liberals who paid attention to this. Now, when we get to neoliberalismo, we have a more ambiguous relationship with feminism. It's hard to tell here. Rather than being for or against in general, neoliberalism is indifferent towards women because neoliberalism is indifferent towards anyone. They are of the opinion that the government shouldn't help anyone. So they are neither for or against, right? They're definitely not going to help women, but they also, neoliberalism also doesn't have any prejudice against it. Many key figures in this movement were women. For example, Margaret Thatcher, the first neoliberal prime minister of the United Kingdom, or just this year, although you could also count as fascist, you would have the former dictator of Bolivia, Agnes, who got dethroned 2 weeks ago. She also is a woman. So there's no prejudice. Neoliberalism simply doesn't care. It doesn't draw any distinctions. And if you want to credit with something, you could say that neoliberalism helped with the access of women towards the labor market globally, because with neoliberalism, due to lower wages, we have institutionalized the two-earner model, right? In the past, when wages were higher, you as a family could make it with only the man working. Now, if you're middle class, really both adults need to work, otherwise you can't cut it. Therefore, that forced more women onto the labor market. Now, if that's a positive or negative thing depends on the angle that you're looking at, right? In the positive sense, it helped the empowerment of women and the acceptance of women on the labor market, and the need for women to join education, etc., etc., etc. So that made women more independent in a sense, right, or more emancipated, because they got normalized that you there and study. On the other hand, it also, the disadvantage of being forced to work is being forced to work. And in most cases on Earth, that resulted in women taking all kind of precarious jobs. And, this doesn't take away any of the stress of having to take care of the family, because you're both working and the government does nothing under neoliberalism. So you work all day, then have to come home and then still have to clean, cook, and take care of the children. So it did cause a lot more stress. So this is a kind of give and take thing, but we could credit neoliberalism with it, right? And sometimes it also mixes with identity politics. For example, Hillary Clinton, who I consider a neoliberal, drew the female card quite heavily in her election campaign, right? Playing out that she was a woman. However, it is limited because they are not necessarily promising to do anything in particular for women. They will just put female candidates forward, which is, something you could in Mexico. You could, I don't know if you would count them as neoliberal or conservative, but Mexico Libre has a female head, right? Well, at the front at least. Of course, it's her husband also who runs things, but she was the presidential candidate, right? So that's the center right. Center right is kind of neutral. Center left rather affectionate towards this, but there are also ideologies that don't match well with feminism, right? There are ideologies that react against it. So anti-feminism is a recurrent element of both neoconservative political campaigns and fascist ones, right? So I haven't explained these things yet, but think of people like Trump, think of Putin, think of Bolsonaro in Brazil, right? These are the type of people I'm talking about. They're not exactly feminist actors, right? And their reaction against feminism, you can have a more aggressive or more defensive variant. The more aggressive one you would rarely see in these, only from very conservative movements, religious parties, etc., or maybe Putin. Is the idea that women have their place, right? Which is the kitchen, of course, and they kind of want to reflect it by having no woman in their cabinet, by now and then remarking that women really should be there, or simply by changing the law to encourage that. But that, although it was very common in real fascism, right, in in Hitler's days, it's not so much anymore. What we have a lot of today is a more defensive variant, where you kind of signal that you're not going to speak out against women. You're just not going to take them seriously. You're going to quite openly not going to take them seriously, quite openly tolerate abuse, right? Tolerate having a lot of people with rape accusations on your team. Is kind of tolerating soft abuse, and in general making fun of feminists. I want to show you a video about this. Let me see. I think I have to share my screen differently then. Oh no, I should have clicked it first. Anyway. Patience. Okay. I want to show you a video of Italy, of the Prime Minister of Italy. Not the current one. Currently, socialists have been ruling Italy for a decade. But before that, and probably before you were aware of Italian politics, you had a man called Silvio Berlusconi, who was from the far right, and he used to be the Prime Minister of Italy. And I want to show you a clip of him. And let me see if you can understand what's going on in this clip. So you can see this?
Yes, teacher.
Okay.
Yes, teacher.
So this, the man in the middle, is him. He's the Prime Minister of Italy. Here he goes. So let's see that again, right? He spots a female police officer. He walks up, he goes to publicly hump her, and then he leaves to his limousine. The early 2000s were an interesting time, right? So, you know what's the crazy thing about this clip? Well, the craziest thing, many crazy things about it. It's not even in Italy. This is in Germany. He's in another country. He's walking outside the German parliament here. And he is gonna hump their police officers. What do you think? Any responses?
Well, it's disgusting and disrespectful.
Are you shocked?
Yes, I'm trying to understand why will he do that? I don't know why. Does did he make a statement after that or something?
He's just super macho. It's part of his. He's Trump before Trump existed. Trump is based on. He's the original Trump. So his whole character was that he was the big chingon, and like he was kind of like almost like a pro wrestler in his attitude. So he would basically just want to be this big macho guy, and he would play into machismo, which is strong in Italy, to be popular. Now and then he would do things like that to still assert his status. He once got on trial for child prostitution with, well, not child, she was 18. And his defense was um, not that he didn't sleep with her, but it wasn't prostitution because he would never pay for sex. Women would come to him. That's his official statement in court on this accusation. So he's just a very machismo guy. And this happens more often, right? Trump does things like this, not that extreme maybe, but close to it. Right? Bolsonaro does things like that, etc., etc., etc. So this is more in the fascist, neoconservative camp, right? Now, how can we understand not these people, but kind of the people who support them, right? Or this, because they do things that are tolerated by their voters, right? I wrote an essay about this partly, which I posted in the description of this lecture. But I think part of the reaction against feminism, not these extreme things, but in general, some kind of discontent that is with this. I think we have to understand it in a more broader context of globalization, where the world is changing quite fast. And a lot of people, it's all about money and upwards mobility, and most people are not winning this game in society, right? So I think that a lot of people, both men and women, by the way, find security in stable gender patterns. And when that starts to be questioned in a world that's already quite mad and that changes so fast, I think they feel that this traditional identity is a lost line of security. I think if you want to be a bit understanding towards it, which you should be as a feminist, you should want to understand why people oppose you, so you can fix that. I think that's one of the undercurrents of this reaction against feminism, as well as certain fears of demands of feminism by, I would say, both men and women. So to give an example of what I just explained, as a woman, right, not all women are successful, right, by society standards. Most are not. And if you're at the bottom of things, since you don't find success necessarily on the labor market, maybe you're just very pretty and you can find a lot of success in being attractive to men, and that's kind of your lane. And you don't feel comfortable about other women judging you for that. Or maybe you didn't do that good on the labor market, but you are a mother, and you base a lot of your identity on being a good mother, right? Your life kind of went bad, but it's okay. At least motherhood, here I won't fail. This I'm gonna do really good, right? And then it's a bit annoying when, I don't know, 19-year-old girls shout that, kind of stigmatize motherhood, or would this whole idea that you have to be an independent woman and this and that and become a CEO, etc. That might not appeal to these people. And that's why even women sometimes would not be totally in tune with this third wave feminism, right? So we should not necessarily tolerate these reactions against it, but we should understand a bit where the people who support those clowns, where those people come from. And on that note, are there any questions so far? Let me pause for a second. Oh, wait, I don't have much time left. Let me take those questions at the end. I want to talk in the last 10 minutes a little bit about criticism of feminism. Yes, we have to do it, but I'm not going to give you conservative criticism of that. If you want that, you should open your family WhatsApp group. So I'm not going to do that. But I will have some critical remarks from the left, which are more strategic of nature. They're not about values, it's not a disagreement on values. But I do have some criticism that comes from disagreement on tactics on this. Two in particular. One of them, dear students, is that as a form of identity politics, right? Feminism is about identity, it's about group identity. Therefore, it is inherently emotional because it's personal, right? And that goes for all identity politics, not feminism in particular, but that can sometimes, I feel, hinder strategic behavior. For example, one of the things that identity politics is bad at in general is recognizing their own victories, because they start from a very hostile us versus them, or some of them, position. And that makes that you don't see when you're winning. And it's very important to see when you're winning to stay motivated as an activist. So, for example, in Mexico, you had these protests, March last year, right? And one of the demands was to do the murder of Ingrid to better protect victims from humiliation, right? And they made a law about that, right? So it's a win. And it's important that you recognize when you're winning, and not be in this eternal frustrated crusade, but sometimes also notice when things are actually changing and make sure you count that, and also being open to bargaining with things. Another thing that comes with this group identity thing, another problem with that is that women are not a political group, right? Women are a sex. They're not a class. They're not a country, and they're not a political party. There's nothing that unites them besides being women. And there is no such thing as a leader of women, right? There's a leader of the pre, but there's no leader of woman. So you get in a difficult situation when feminists try to speak for all women, which they sometimes tend to do when they say things like what women really want, or when they say things like, when they get into conflicts about these things. The problem with that is that they don't, right? Feminism that speaks to women, that wants to persuade them to support certain agendas that feminism thinks are in their interest. But that's not the same thing as speaking for women. So that leads to sometimes awkward situations where people disagree, where women disagree with feminists. And then you get into these very awkward discussions about, oh, but you are really pro-abortion. or you're really pro-prostitution because you have a false consciousness, right? You have been manipulated by the patriarchy into thinking that. And that might be true or not, but these type of arguments don't help your movement. You will push people away rather than attract them, right? If you are too, especially you as a person, right? That's not a leader of any movement. If you speak for all people, it's like socialists pretending to speak for all working class people. And if a working class person disagrees with them, then accusing them of not being working class, right? It's a bit of an absurd situation. Another thing that comes with identity and the emphasis on womanhood, right, is that it might sometimes blind you towards what's actually in the interest of a woman by overly emphasizing the female aspect of it. What do I mean by this? This is about intersectionality, right? The idea that women have other than just being woman, right? It might be being poor, it might be being indigenous, it might be being of minority religion. There are other grounds for their problems. And it is important to recognize, to you if you're a feminist, that statistically speaking, those grounds are usually more significant than gender. So for example, to talk about poverty, right? Something I know well. Yes, women have a higher poverty risk than men, but this is a small higher risk. This is about 2-3% from the top. People who come from a lower class background have a 10 times higher risk than that, right? Indigenous people have a far higher risk. So being poor is much more significant for outcomes, or being lower class is much more significant for outcomes than gender is, even if gender is significant. Now, what that means for policy is that if you want to help women, you should also look at the things that help them in other senses than them being women. So to give you an example of policy, right? Pensions. If a government pensions, you might think, oh, that's not about women because it doesn't mention women. Except that raising pensions strongly benefits women more. Why? Because women get older than men. Therefore, they will be on the pension longer. So there's more redistribution, right? There's simply more women claiming pensions because there's more old women than there are old men. And women typically have worked less years in their life. Thus, they're more dependent also on the height of a pension. So actually, pension policy is very relevant to women, even if you wouldn't think of that at first, right? Now to move on, because I want to keep ranting on this, to another point, which is related, is that feminism sometimes is at risk of ignoring its own classist tensions. Feminism has certain elements of classism in it for historical reasons, because that's how it started. It started as a high-class movement. And that means that, and sort of as a highly educated movement, right? Mainly of university educated women, which means that sometimes along the road, the issues that they've been fighting for over the centuries have not always been the issues of all women, right? And sometimes this leads to certain odd hypocrisies. For example, some of you, if you're honest with yourself, some of you would think it would be good for Mexico if poor people would not vote. And more of you would maybe doubt if it would be good for Mexico if uneducated people would not vote. Yet none of you, I hope, would agree that women should not vote, right? Of course, born educated people are women, right? So you have to kind of be aware of what you really want in these things. And are you really for all women, or are you only for women of your class? And when it comes down to it, you would reject the voice of poor or uneducated women because they are that. And lastly, this kind of ignoring of this has led us to, I think, to a lot of fake progress. And here I come to probably my deepest point. I would say that I'm going to claim that emancipation of women has largely failed. Why is that? That's because most emancipated women have not actually solved any of the work-home problems. It's not that their husband, there's not a lot of people, not a lot of men who both cook and clean in the world. But what most successful women have done, your lawyers, your judges, your CEOs, your professors, is that they've simply outsourced their female work to poor women. So behind every successful woman, there is another woman from Oaxaca who takes care of her kids, who cleans and who cooks, right? So I would actually say we haven't really solved anything. We just emancipated women at the cost of other women. I think there's still a lot to do if you want to reach a real equality in this matter, both in private and also in public things. So I concluded by saying that, well, the working class agenda, feminism, is either not really feminism or not really powerful. And on that note, I end. Questions, criticism, burning me on a cross. You can do it now.
I have a question. What do you think about the gender abolition? Ay, se me fue la palabra en español. Abolición. Alguien ayúdeme.
The idea that there should be no genders?
Yeah.
I'm not very interested in it. I think human civilization, like any book, any play, any theater thing, anything that's worth watching kind of plays off of gender, right? Whether it's a romance story or things like that. I think just rejecting that as a whole is, I don't know if we're going to gain much from that. I also think that gender is useful. I think talking about real men and real women is useful as long as you don't define them against each other. For example, I think masculinity is an important thing. I think there should be a difference between boys and men. I think you should earn manhood by being honest, by being responsible, just like I think there's a difference between girls and women, in how serious you are. So I think that gender, if we use it differently in a more honor sense, I think it can be very useful. But that's my opinion on it. I don't know if people share that. It doesn't really matter what I think. Do you have other questions? I know we're going over time. So if you need to go, you can go, but this is a good moment to ask anything or say anything. What did you think of this lecture? Let me ask you this way.
Teacher,
Yes.
so I have a question. So according to what I understand about your feminism, it should it, it should focus on a specific branch of feminism instead of having several ones. So the woman who feel aligned with that certain branch to well, like they have, yeah, like the same ideal instead of having different ideals and fighting.
No,
fighting.
no, that's no. That's not up to me to say. It's more about starting a discussion about these issues amongst them. I don't think that any branch. I'm not gonna take a position on that. It's more of being aware, I think, of the ultimately strategic things. That's my political correct answer to your question. Any other questions or criticism or comments? You're very silent. It scares me.
Okay, so I'm gonna say something.
Okay.
It's just about a comment that I heard about prostitution or sex work being about the patriarchy. It is not about the patriarchy itself, but about capitalism and unequal opportunities. Also, it is about the privatization of education. It's a more complex problem than just saying that the patriarchy is guilty, you know.
So you are against it, I understand, but in a more complex sense. Like you think to deal with this, we need to look a lot further than just the legality of it.
Well, I do believe that every woman is free to do whatever she pleases with her body, but I think it should be at least regulated by sort of program, or I don't know. Uh, mm, I don't know how to explain it, but I think it should be regulated to be taken as a serious job, so they can have access to certain benefits, because as far as it is not regulated, it is a problem uh, for women, and I think the society as well. But yeah, it is a more complex problem, as you already stated.
Yeah, in Mexico, it's neither of these things, right? Prostitution is not legal, nor it's not a job category that you could file taxes for. Um, Prostituting a person is illegal, but prostitution is not. But neither is it recognized as a job. So we are in a very gray zone regarding to this. Usually it comes down to local policy, to city policy, and how this is dealt with. But it is definitely not regulated in any consistent way across the union. Okay. Thank you, then. I went over my time, so I have to let you go. Next time, dear students, it's marks. You have to show up. I will be very don't. So see you tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you. Bye,
Okay.
teacher.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.